Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. It is our first episode of Season 2 as the new league year in the NFL will begin on March 9th. It is March 1st right now, so we figured now would be a good time to get the offseason started, and we'll take a look at the NFL draft and the Steelers as far as who they might be looking at and some other offseason news since we haven't had an episode since the Super Bowl, I believe. So, Austin, welcome back to the show. How have you been?
Been all right, and how about you, man?
It's been all right. A little weird not talking to you a couple times a week. It's something I've kind of become accustomed to, but now that we're getting back into it a little bit, I'm looking forward to the combine and hopefully the draft, which is still a little ways away, but something that we can start to look forward to as we look at some college players. We'll start with the quarterbacks today, but before we get to that, some key free agency news, or I guess some key Steelers free agency news. Starting first with Le'Veon Bell, the Steelers applied the franchise tag to him first yesterday. That's around a total of $12.7 million deal. Or it's not a deal per se, but the Steelers are able to keep him for one more year. They now have until July 15th to extend him with a long-term deal. Austin, how important was this move?
I think it was very important to make sure that he stayed home. He didn't leave Pittsburgh there is no reason he became a free agent. I mean, the extension isn't very important right now, but obviously they have until July 15th, but the franchise tag was pretty important in my eyes. What do you think?
It absolutely bought the Steelers some time. They didn't want to have to worry about losing him to free agency and having other teams contacting him. This was absolutely the right move to make, and now they have themselves a little bit of time to worry about getting him a long-term deal. His teammate, Antonio Brown, who was further along in the process, just got his long-term deal done the same day. In fact, I think it was about 2 hours later, the news broke that Antonio Brown had signed a 4-year deal worth, I think, somewhere between $68 and $72 million deal. This will be brought onto the cap not this season, as Brown is going to finish out his last contract. It will start beginning after this next season. So this was obviously the number one priority of the offseason and something that both sides have been talking about for most of this offseason and last offseason too. I think everyone was a big time winner in this, both the Steelers, Brown, and the fans too. Now you have Brown, who's the highest paid receiver in the league. The Steelers didn't really overpay him, and I don't believe they had a deal that was too long where Brown is going to be old at the end of it and maybe falling off a cliff. The Steelers have their top weapon locked up for what's likely to be the remainder of Ben Roethlisberger's career. I think this was an all-around great job done by both the Steelers for getting the deal done and for Brown, who was very professional during the entire process, something that he got maligned for a lot during the season and the playoffs with the whole celebration penalties, the changing of the cleats, name whatever you want, the Facebook Live video. This is something he handled very well. What are your thoughts on the Antonio Brown deal?
Oh, I like it. I saw a lot of people complaining on Twitter to Steelers Depot that they overpaid him, but I like it. He got $19 million in guarantees, and he deserves it. He is probably the best wide receiver in this league right now, up there with Julio Jones and Odell Beckham, maybe. I don't know. It's really just him or Julio Jones. That's basically the argument. But I think he deserves it, and I think you have to pay your players. He's been a contributor. He's been the only one we talked about all season being consistent, him and Le'Veon Bell. So I think he deserves it. I don't think he got overpaid. I think it was a good deal on both sides.
The other thing you have to consider is that in 4 years, when this deal is almost up, he won't be the highest paid receiver anymore. That changes almost on a yearly basis, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a fantastic move. And then as of a few hours ago, the Steelers re-signed James Harrison, the ageless wonder, for 2 years and $3.5 million, what is likely his final deal, although then again, maybe it isn't, because he constantly proves us wrong. What do you think about the James Harrison signing?
Oh, I really like that. Even if he doesn't play for the next 2 years and he's just a backup, he's just kind of there. I like that because I like his experience. I like him teaching younger kids that are coming up, because obviously Steelers, one of their biggest needs right now is a edge rusher, a pass rusher. So I would like them to learn behind James Harrison, and he still looks like he's ready to play. So like, if he wants to play, good. So I think he's just a really good person to keep having there, especially for 2 more years. Which leaves us with only one more person that's really important in my eyes that hasn't gotten a deal, and it's Lawrence Timmons. So.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's interesting. There's a lot of question about whether the deal will get done, how much it would be worth, and who needs who more. Whether or not Lawrence Timmons needs the Steelers more, or vice versa. But we can get into that another time. But for the time being, I think this was a deal that, the writing was really on the wall. We all knew this was coming. It was just a question of when. Harrison has always loved being with the Steelers. Ever since he came out of retirement in 2014, the Steelers pretty much said, we'll take you until you decide not to come back, because the Steelers don't have anybody better than him right now as far as rushing the passer goes. And the next 2 years, he'll have another good chance to add to his Steelers record sack total. So, he does a lot of things pretty solid. He's obviously not the player he used to be, but because of his incredible work ethic and the way he takes care of his body, he's able to stay in the league and is still a productive player. So that's something I'm excited about going forward, and it's something that makes me feel a little bit better about as far as the outside linebackers go. So now moving on, today is our first off-season podcast, our first show for the off-season and the draft. So we were going to take a look at the quarterbacks. The Steelers finished last season with 3 quarterbacks. Obviously, all of them as far as from top to bottom. You got Ben Roethlisberger, the franchise quarterback, now has 3 years left on his deal. The total amount of money left on that deal is just over $64.5 million. You got backup Landry Jones, who is now a free agent, finishing his rookie contract at the age of 27. And you have Zach Mettenberger, who has 1 year left on his deal at $690,000. So let's evaluate the position, Austin. Talk to me about the quarterbacks who are currently on the roster, that being Roethlisberger and Mettenberger. What do the Steelers have in these 2 guys?
Roethlisberger is doing well right now, but he might possibly only have the 3 years left in him, or worse, less. And those 3 years are going to come and go really quickly. That being said, on the roster, let's look at Mettenberger, because he's the only one there. That's a sure thing. I've personally always liked Mettenberger and thought the Titans didn't give him a fair stint when he was there. But I also don't think he's fantastic, and sure as hell don't want him to replace Roethlisberger after he goes. For his price, I think he's a solid young backup. And it's just, I think he's just not a face of the franchise kind of guy. He's not good enough to be a leader. Like the Titans, like I said, the Titans didn't give him a fair stint, but I think he's just not good enough to be able to be a real, a good one. He might, his ceiling is rather low. I'll put it that way. What do you think of the quarterbacks on the roster?
Well, it's the same way it has been for over a decade now with Ben Roethlisberger. The Steelers have their franchise quarterback, but for the first time, the fans got a bit of a scare after the AFC Championship defeat to the Patriots, where Roethlisberger hinted at not returning for the next season. But now that some time has passed, it's looking more and more like he'll be coming back, and I have to imagine that he won't be leaving this money on the table. He's got 3 years left. He's got weapons. I think that because of all of that and the fact that he still is playing well, that he will finish out his contract, and if we're lucky, maybe he'll stay for an extra 2, but the maximum is 5 years left for him. The everything that happened this offseason is just a reminder to the fans that the window is closing faster than people think. So as far as Roethlisberger goes, that's what I have to say. Moving on to Zach Mettenberger, I do agree with you. He didn't win a single game when he started with the Titans back in 2014, but that doesn't say that I don't like him. But at the same point, he impressed in some spots with the Titans. But when he came to the Steelers and was the number 3 quarterback, I thought that he had some things to prove, and he could have really impressed me by unseating Landry Jones as the backup. And he didn't do that. So I really wasn't encouraged by seeing that. And I'm a little more convinced that Mettenberger is a number 3 option, and at this point, a questionable backup. Time will tell if he can become a quality backup. Like you said, he has a low ceiling. I think at best he's a mid-level backup. So time will tell. And moving on, the other quarterback that is now free agent, Landry Jones, the Steelers' backup for the past couple of years, with Roethlisberger's potential retirement on the horizon, and you've only got Zach Mettenberger as the only other quarterback on the roster. Is it important that the Steelers try to re-sign him? Do you think that they will?
I think the Steelers should resign him under two conditions. That he comes back for relatively cheap. He's a backup and shouldn't expect a lot from this deal. But I expect him to leave on his own because of this. I feel like the Steelers are going to offer him a low contract, and then he could get better somewhere else. And then the second condition is that Zach Mettenberger gets cut, because regardless if we re-sign Jones, I still want the Steelers to go draft another quarterback either this year or the next year, because Landry Jones can't be the leader of this franchise, and we don't need four quarterbacks on the roster. So those are my two conditions. I don't think they should, in my opinion, but if they have to, I'd want those two conditions to be met. How about you, man?
Well, compared to my attitude from last month, I actually wouldn't be completely disappointed if the Steelers re-sign Jones at the right price, of course. While I've always been a critic of him, I believe there's value in keeping him on the roster, if only for one more year. The question really is whether or not he will want to come back. Right now, if you're Landry Jones, you're 27 years old, you're looking at your future prospects in the league. You haven't had that much of a chance to play over the past 4 years since you became the quarterback. Right now is your premium opportunity after your last two performances at quarterback with the Steelers. This is your chance to make any type of money in the NFL outside of the veteran minimum. So I think he'd be crazy to try to not go somewhere else and see if he can become a starting quarterback somewhere. If by any chance he doesn't, I'd like to see him come back with the Steelers, maybe just on a 1-year deal. Ensure that they have some sort of depth going forward, because like I said, I'm not very confident in Mettenberger, but I don't think that could make it impossible for the Steelers to draft a quarterback as a long-term backup. But if I had to take a guess, I think Jones will sign elsewhere, and the Steelers are going to draft a quarterback in the middle of the late rounds to develop as the future backup to Ben Roethlisberger, and maybe the backup, and maybe then he'll become the starter after Roethlisberger retires. So moving on, how important do you think is taking a quarterback in this draft?
On a scale from 1 to 10, I'd say it's like a 4 or a 5. It's starting to become an issue, but it isn't the most pressing need at the moment, with Roethlisberger still planning to play for a few years. Still, it wouldn't hurt to take a quarterback late right now and hope learning under Roethlisberger will do a late-round pick some justice. We've seen some late-round picks become amazing at Tom Brady, but what do you think, man? How important is the quarterback?
I'll put it at medium importance like you. Again, everything depends on if Landry Jones returns. Because I'm assuming he isn't, though, I think the Steelers need to draft a quarterback sometime. You simply can't have Zach Mettenberger and an undrafted free agent to be the backups for Roethlisberger, because more often than not, it's a safe bet that he'll miss at least a game or two next year. If you draft someone, maybe you have a good chance that they'll know the playbook well enough to run the offense somewhat competently by midseason or toward the season's end. So it's something that the Steelers should probably look at, but at the same point, it's also a weak draft class as far as quarterbacks are concerned. It's something they could probably get away with not going towards quarterback this year. They certainly don't need a number one quarterback, but it's something that they may want to look at for depth reasons going forward. So before we start looking at the prospects in the draft, Austin, is there any chance the Steelers sign another free agent quarterback to replace Landry Jones should he walk?
Probably not. The Steelers aren't looking to break the bank and spend a lot this offseason on a position that they don't really, really need. And the only choices that are really offered right now are Josh McCown and Ryan Mallett. Like, that's about it. So I'm cool with them not. What do you think?
Honestly, are Josh McCown and Ryan Mallett really better than Landry Jones? Like, they're probably all about the same price, same type of player, and I'd rather have Jones at that point because he already knows the offense, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think there's much of a point unless if you're going the veteran minimum for a number 3 wide quarterback, and there really isn't a point in keeping him there because he's only going to be there for a year. So I don't really see the point. So moving on to the quarterbacks. There's obviously a lot of quarterbacks in the draft coming up this year. I think there's 25 that declared for the draft or were seniors that are potentially looking at getting drafted. So we decided to look at 6 quarterbacks who are projected between rounds 4 through 7 that we believe the Steelers could potentially take one. So, Austin, you want to give me your first quarterback? We'll talk about him and see if we think he's a good fit for the Steelers or not.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with Joshua Dobbs from Tennessee. He's 6'3" and 194 pounds, and I'm going to start off with what I think of him. I hope that this is not the route the Steelers take, because Joshua Dobbs is predominantly good for what he can do on the ground, which is never a bad thing, but it feels like it's not a Steelers kind of quarterback in my eyes. Me personally, I like the gunners, the tanks with strong arms and accurate throws, not the runners like Newton, Taylor, and Wilson. Due to his size, he is more like a Taylor or Wilson too, which I would prefer Newton if we really were to get a runner. But while Dobbs looked to have a rather decent arm, a lot of his passes were inaccurate. Even in his highlights, a lot of the throws he made were making the receiver work back to the ball. And there were a lot of balls thrown behind the receiver. He's also rather small in terms of his weight. He's 194 pounds, and he would probably need to put on some weight to survive in the NFL if the Steelers were to draft him in hopes of anything. If they were to draft him, it would change the Steelers' scheme around, because what this guy is best at is running the ball, and the Steelers don't really do quarterback run design plays right now, obviously, with Roethlisberger. So, yeah.
So
do you want to go over your first quarterback?
Sure, but before I do, so based on what you're telling me, this guy kind of projects as like a project player, maybe even a guy that could become sort of like an Antoine Randall or Terrell Pryor, a guy that becomes a wide receiver almost. Is that what you're saying?
I think he would do really well as a wide receiver. I honestly would look at him and I thought he would actually do decently as a running back, as weird as that sounds. Because he runs well. He makes jump cuts. He just needs a little bit more protection on the ball too, because that's also a problem. But he could be a player like Terrell Pryor that switches over. I could see that.
Interesting. So maybe he projects as a backup NFL quarterback and someone who could be a gadget kind of player elsewhere. Interesting. So first quarterback I looked at is Chad Kelly, the Ole Miss product. At 6'2", 215 pounds, he is the nephew of NFL Hall of Fame quarterback Jim Kelly. He had an up-and-down collegiate career, to say the least. He was the number 1 quarterback in New York State coming out of high school in 2012, and he spent a couple of years at Clemson, but he was kicked out of the program due to behavior that was quote-unquote detrimental to the team. The next year, he ended up with the junior college Eastern Mississippi, and they actually won the national championship that year. Following that season, he became the starter at Ole Miss for 2 years, where he displayed fantastic arm strength and talent, setting an Ole Miss record for passing yards and leading the SEC in passing in his first year there in 2015. This season, his play was cut short due to a knee injury, but he is a good project player. Overall, looking at his strengths and weaknesses, I wanted to talk about Chad Kelly's physical tools. He has the work ethic on the field to become a quality NFL quarterback, but his weaknesses could be his maturation, and I believe that could be the one thing that holds him back from realizing his full potential. Looking further at his strengths, he shows good knowledge of the routes the receivers are running and often throws the ball with good timing. He has a good frame physically and has the tools to succeed both as a passer with a good arm and has surprisingly good speed too. He finished with nearly 1,000 total rushing yards at Ole Miss in his 2 years there. As far as his weaknesses go, like I said, his maturation, he had a lot of problems with off-the-field incidents back through high school and in college too. And he had run-ins with his coaches. Questions about his maturity is definitely a big red flag for a lot of NFL teams. And beyond that, on the field, he has a gunslinger mentality that has shown to be problems for a lot of quarterbacks, namely one Jay Cutler. But his confidence is something that is good, but he's a little too confident, and it's something that he's going to want to break that habit of if he wants to realize his full potential. I believe that he has the potential to be a starting quarterback someday, but he's got some work to do to get there. You want to give me your second quarterback, Austin?
Yeah, sure. The next one is Gerard Evans from Virginia Tech. Evans is a 6'3" and 238-pound man. For comparison to somebody in the NFL, he's much like Cam Newton. He's a big guy who can run and has shown that he has speed and still can throw if necessary. As a runner, he looks very poised, like running like a fullback and lowering his shoulder. He's ran over people from the highlights I've seen. He's done jukes through people. Anyway, he can throw the deep ball pretty well, and what I'm most impressed with is his throw on the run. He's just as accurate on the move as he is in the pocket, and I thought that was really impressive. What's bad about Evans is that he gets stuck on the first read a lot from what I've seen and what people have reported, or will try to run, which shows he may lack patience, and he also struggles with accuracy often. He relies on the receivers to work back to the ball a lot, and he also might be a product of a relatively simple Virginia Tech playbook and having NFL-worthy pass catchers on his team with him. I forgot their names, but there's two people projected to go pretty high that are wide receivers on that team. And that's basically it for Evans. Let's hear about your second guy.
Question. As far as Evans or Dobbs go, which one do you personally like better as someone that the Steelers may draft?
Oh, completely Evans. Like I said when talking about Joshua Dobbs, I prefer Cam. If we're gonna get a guy that's a runner, I want a power runner as a quarterback, and I would totally go with Gerard Evans because he's more like Cam Newton. They actually have very similar height and weight, so like they're really like each other when he was at Auburn, but definitely Gerard Evans.
So moving on to my second quarterback, I have the University of Pittsburgh product Nathan Peterman, standing at 6'2" and 225 pounds. Ironically enough, this man lost the quarterback job at Tennessee to Joshua Dobbs. Peterman was a 2-year starter at the University of Pittsburgh who showed improvement in his second season. After becoming the starter midway through the 2015 season, he threw 20 touchdowns and followed that up with a 27-touchdown performance this season, only throwing 7 interceptions and just under 3,000 yards. He also played in a pro-style offense that closely resembles what an NFL offense is today, and his performance at the Senior Bowl improved his draft stock slightly, according to outside sources. With Nathan Peterman, I believe the Steelers would be getting someone that projects as a backup at best. As far as his strengths go, he has most of the physical tools to succeed. He's got the good frame, he's got a strong arm, and he's got mobility, and he already knows how to run a pro-style offense. He showed pretty solid decision-making throughout his career with a solid touchdown-to-interception ratio of 47-15 over his collegiate career. Unfortunately, though, Peterman struggles with accuracy, and oftentimes his receivers have to really work to make the catch from what I remember seeing. And even though he didn't throw many picks, you could tell that his ball placement just wasn't where it really should be, and the receivers had to make catches or dropped passes that really should have been thrown more precisely. The other thing that has to be considered with Peterman is the fact that his upside really is not nearly as steep as people may think, because he already played in a pro-style offense for 2 years, and yes, he improved, but at the same point, even though he knows how to run a pro-style offense, he probably won't be getting much better than he already is, hence why he projects as a backup. So as far as someone, if you were to ask me who I like better, I like Peterman for the idea that the Steelers are looking for depth and probably looking for more of a long-term backup, but at the same time, I think Chad Kelly has a higher upside and is someone that I think has more of the physical tools and, of course, the NFL pedigree to be a more complete quarterback. What is your third and final quarterback, Austin? Sorry, who?
My third and final quarterback is going to be Miss Brad Kaya from Miami. The dude is 6'4" and 215 pounds, which isn't bad since Roethlisberger is 6'5" and 241 pounds. He's the current leader in passing yards all time in Miami in just 3 years, and one of the seasons he had a concussion. He has the adequate height to do great and room to put on some weight if necessary. And watching his highlights, he seems to be really accurate and decent at decision-making. He finds his second and third receivers and has really good feel for pocket presence. The problem comes with him holding onto the ball for too long, hesitating, and taking too many hits because of it. Todd Haley is focused on making Roethlisberger get rid of the ball as soon as possible since he's been there. So I believe he'd be able to teach the same if Kaya were to be drafted to the Steelers, assuming Todd Haley would still be there too. And his arm strength is nothing to write home about, but it's decent enough where I think the Steelers could still use them. And that's really it. So if I had to pick between these three guys, obviously Dobbs is out. But if I had to pick between the better of the two, I think Kaya is my favorite. Kaya is definitely, I think, the best out of the three I looked over, and I think it's not even a question. I'm more, like I said earlier, I'm the gunslinger, and Kaya is the closest thing out of the three I look to as the gunslinger. So let's move on to your third quarterback.
All right. Well, my last quarterback is Davis Webb, the quarterback from Cal. Standing tall at 6'5", but only 194 pounds. He replaced last year's number one pick in the draft, Jared Goff, and he played fantastic. He set multiple passing records as a senior for the Bears. Ranked second nationally with 4,295 passing yards. Also finishing with 43 total touchdowns, 37 through the air, to earn all Pac-12 honorable mention. He also won the Senior Bowl MVP. He starred in a similar spread up-tempo scheme at both Texas Tech and Cal, where his reads were simplified, and he's going to have an adjustment period in the NFL for sure. He has some good mechanics and decision-making problems. He has good mechanics and some good decision-making, but ultimately his mechanics and decision-making are going to have to be revised by some coaches. But Webb has the arm that NFL coaches are going to be intrigued about. He projects as a third-string NFL quarterback who, as a rookie, can eventually become a backup in a few years. So looking at his strengths here, he's definitely, like I mentioned with Peterman and Kelly, he has an NFL arm, and he's got leadership qualities that NFL teams usually look for. He makes usually quick decisions. Oftentimes they're good, but not always. He's not overly mobile, but he can move well enough to avoid pressure in the pocket. His weaknesses, on the other hand, he struggles to throw with good mechanics at some times. And when he moves at all besides his drop back, he really struggles as far as his throwing mechanics go. As I mentioned with his weight, he's not bulky at all, so that's something that teams are going to be really concerned about, and he's going to have to put on some weight if he wants his career to last long at all. And too often he'll challenge tight coverages that he shouldn't, in a similar way to Chad Kelly as far as the gunslinger mentality goes. But if I had to rank these three quarterbacks as far as my preference on where the Steelers take them, it's definitely in the order that I presented them to you. Chad Kelly first, due to his upside and the ability that he's shown throughout the last 2 years to place the ball and the good mobility. Nathan Peterman, I like him, but at the same time, he also projects as only a backup quarterback at best, and Webb is kind of a wild card. In a few years, he could be a guy that projects as a good backup, maybe even a low-level starter, but for now, he's definitely more of a project player. Looking at the downside real quickly, I forgot to mention about Kelly. That's something that's really going to drop him down is his attitude and his maturity issues, but as far as the rankings go, it's definitely Kelly first, then Peterman second, and Webb third. Austin, you want to give me your final list for the three quarterbacks you looked at?
Oh yeah, it was Kaya number one, Evans number two, and then Dobbs number three. I really hope that the Steelers don't draft Dobbs is my only issue with it, because I really don't think Dobbs is going to be successful as a quarterback ever. He's not even worth working on it for a project. He doesn't weigh enough. If the Steelers were to draft Dobbs, they would have to convert him to a wide receiver or something and use him like Edelman and use trick plays and something like that. But regardless, it just Kaya seemed to have the most upside out of the three. I saw a lot of what I like out of a quarterback in him, and he set records at Miami. So
let me ask you this, Austin. If you can, pick one quarterback that you think the Steelers would draft and one that you want the Steelers to draft. It can't be the same player.
Okay. I think the Steelers would draft Kaya because he actually fits the best for their scheme because Evans and Dobbs are mostly runners. And, I think it'd be fun to just draft Evans because the Cam Newton style of quarterback is actually kind of fun to watch. So that's what I'd say. How about do the same for yours?
I actually meant all 6 quarterbacks, not just the 3 you looked at.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, my bad.
That's okay.
I would go with Chad Kelly because I like his upside. I mean, it's kind of hypocritical because last year I complained about, not last year, 2 years ago I complained about Manziel and said that he's not going to be good because of his maturity and stuff. And I was right. But I'm going to say Kelly is different. And I think he has the most upside, and I think he could actually be a low-level starter at some point, or maybe even better. So, I mean, he has Jim Kelly as a mentor because of his family. So, I think there's good in there. Then, who I'd want them to draft? I think I'm going to go with Kaya because I like Kaya. I watched his highlights; they were fun. He looked like a pretty good player. So, how about you?
Well, as far as someone that I want them to draft, I don't want like I said, I like Chad Kelly, but the person that intrigues me the most is Kaya. Since I am a University of Pittsburgh fan, I got to see him play a part in torching the Pittsburgh defense, as many teams did last year. But at the same point, Kaya played really well last year. And like you mentioned before, he's got a similar frame to Roethlisberger. And he's definitely got his problems, as quarterbacks in these rounds will. But I think he's someone that would fit really well with the Steelers, and I think that it makes the most sense for the Steelers to draft him. As far as who I think the Steelers will draft, if it's not Kaya, I actually think it would be Peterman, just because of the fact that the Steelers aren't looking for a starter type quarterback, and they already know Peterman because they share facilities and they both play at Heinz Field. They already know him. Maybe they know some things about him that would make them want to draft him, or maybe in fact there's some things about Peterman that they know that would actually keep the Steelers away from Peterman. But in any case, it's definitely an interesting position that we were excited to look at, and definitely not a strong quarterback draft class this season, but there's still some interesting possibilities. But if I'm the Steelers, this is a position that I look at carefully and not one that I want to feel pressured in having to take this year, because there definitely are not great options this year. What are your final thoughts about the quarterbacks this year, Austin?
Yeah, it's just a little rough. And I'd also like to throw out there that we could possibly get one of the last, technically good quarterbacks. We were discussing before the podcast that it's been a mess on who's actually going where. Trubisky, I think, is taken first as the first quarterback to go. Then I don't know. So one of the ones like Kaiser or Mahomes or who's the one I'm forgetting?
Watson.
Or Watson, they might fall, and then a team might not need a quarterback for a few rounds. And so they might be left over too. We didn't really look at them, but we kind of looked for ideally.
That's true. We wanted to take a look at quarterbacks who are right now projected between rounds 4 and 7. There's a surprisingly large amount of quarterbacks, but it's also strange because oftentimes in the NFL, you'll see 3 or 4 quarterbacks go in the first 2 rounds, and then you won't see another till the 5th round. It's very strange how the quarterbacks are picked, and oftentimes it depends on the year and what teams need. So we wanted to give an overview of what most of the experts and other websites are saying about who is in this area. So I tried to pick a list of 6 guys who are in this area. It is possible that other guys will be available later. So, it's kind of tough to tell. Hopefully we'll get more of a solidified sort of rankings after the NFL Combine, which will be coming up soon. So maybe we'll have an updated list at some point. But for the time being, we figured this was a position of medium importance for the Steelers, something that they should look at, but not something that they necessarily need to draft this year. So anything else you wanted to say before we wrap things up for today?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, well, thank you again for joining us and supporting us for the second season of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. We had a great time the first year, and this will be our first full season since we picked it up midway through the season last year. If you have any questions about the show, feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our episodes on YouTube and SoundCloud. Also hoping to have a new YouTube video about the Pittsburgh Steelers' top 10 throws or passes from last season. Hopefully that'll be up soon. I'll keep working on that. If you want to follow us on Twitter or Facebook, that's where we post our updates about the Steelers, their news, NFL news, and these episodes, obviously. Our username is at STS Podcast 1. Go ahead, check it out. Give us a follow. Like us on Facebook. We appreciate all the feedback, and thank you again for joining us today. Austin, it's been too long. I'm glad that we got a chance to do this again. Been a lot of fun, and looking forward to a good off season.
Yes, sir.
All right. Take care, everybody.